Welcome to the Low Carbon, Higher Power podcast. My name is Michael. I'm the Bishop of Bath and Wells, and I am in the unusual position this afternoon of getting to interview the person who normally leads this podcast, the net zero project lead of our diocese of Bath and Wells, Dan. Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to have you here. And I'd like to begin this afternoon by asking you a bit about yourself.
Absolutely.
Tell us about your background. Where did you grow up and what got you into the life of net carbon zero?
Well, it's very interesting to be on the receiving end of those questions for a change. I grew up in London, Essex, with my family, mum, dad, brother, and slowly over time I've moved further away from the big city for various degrees. Started with geography and then specialised more into environmental policy and management. And then, almost fresh out of uni, I got my first start here at the diocese. This job came up only part-time at the time to be involved in assisting Sarah, our colleague, our environment officer here, Sarah Emmett, with net zero work. It was in its infancy when I first joined 3 years ago. And over time my experience grew and the job got bigger and bigger. I think we soon realised what a big task it was to get to net zero in the diocese and end up with this full-time position here.
Wow. So not many people who are geographers, environmental experts necessarily end up working for a Church of England diocese.
True.
How have you found it to be with us and amongst us and of us?
It's certainly not boring, that's for sure. It's I think my friends still can't believe that I work for Church of England. And you're right, lots of people I went to university with, still in touch with, and they didn't go into anything like this. I have a few people from uni that did go into decarbonisation because it's very current and it's a very exciting industry to be in. And lots of companies have net zero targets. But the opportunity, I think, bearing in mind I came into this when I was 22 years old, and the opportunity to, essentially be doing program management, project management at such a young age. And I was lucky enough to have the diocese take a chance on someone so young to do something with that requires so much responsibility. I found it so rewarding, and it's been so interesting. I guess my expertise was in more commercial buildings, like schools, factories, big buildings. I never thought when I was going through university that I'd have anything to do with historic buildings, and that's been an incredibly interesting part of the job, and all the people I've met along the way. And I must say that I had some misconceptions about coming into the Church of England, what it would be like, and I've been proved very wrong. And it's been a fantastic experience from start to finish.
And as you say, the job has got bigger over time. How is it supported within the life of our diocese here?
Good question. I think, as I said, when I first joined, it was only a part-time role, and which was interesting because even when I first joined, I was just doing a couple of days a week, meeting the parishes and meeting the staff, how important the Fifth Mile Commission was to everybody, seemingly. I was like, surely that there's got to be, this has got to be a full-time role, and it's something that everybody takes so seriously. And as it became that full-time role, and you meet more people, you go to the schools, you go to the churches, you meet all the clergy, all the parishioners, and how important the Fifth Mark is, and how, and I think there's always a little bit of conflict sometimes between wider environmental issues and net zero, and where net zero fits within that. But they complement each other nicely. And I think, as time's gone on, people are really understanding that net zero is not some sort of like political thing. It really is integral to our fifth mark and our DNA, I think, as an organisation.
When I encounter you, Dan, I meet somebody who's very, very passionate about this work. What's at the heart of that passion for you?
Well, as you know, I don't come from a faith background, so it's interesting, obviously, working for an organisation where the motivations are sometimes quite different. But I don't think it's all that different at all, really, because it's, I speak to lots of vicars who talk to me from a theological perspective about the environment with fifth mark of mission. And how I feel about it, it just feels like it's the right thing to do. Like, I don't know why we've been put here, but we've been blessed, let's say, with the environment and, all this lovely nature. And who are we to destroy it and not look after it? I think that's my, my sort of motivation there. And I mean, if we really get into it in terms of like what started me on this journey, it was a simple geography lesson with like a really awesome teacher. And that just set me on the path. I've never looked back since.
Wow, fantastic. And tell me, as you're here with us, working across Bath and Wells, if you were to summarise, what's the difference you personally hope to make? What are you going for? What's your goal?
Well, there's, addressing the elephant in the room, we have a very ambitious target in achieving net zero emissions by 2030. That's hugely ambitious. And I think, if we're being realistic, that's going to be a really difficult target to achieve. But had we not set a 2030 target, I don't think we'd be as close to it as we would have been. And I think, I'd really love to still be here by 2030 and be working for the diocese. That'd be great. And I think, if we're able to look back over this period, I mean, ideally we'll have lots and lots of buildings. Bear in mind we have over 1,000 buildings in the Diocese of Bath and Wells. We'd have lots of buildings that are, greener, cleaner, less expensive to run. I think I'd like that to be the legacy that we leave behind, is that we've actually, if not achieved 2030 net zero, that we've got really, really close to it.
And could you tell us a bit more about how you understand net zero? Because I think most of us walk into a building and think, well, some heating is on here or the lights are on. How can this building be truly net zero when we know we're using power to make its life possible? How do you define net zero?
Interesting question. So net zero from... in terms of our net zero target, how we look at that's net zero carbon. So we're not looking at the other greenhouse gases involved in anything, just carbon dioxide. And I mean, you can break it down by building, but across the board we have lots of buildings, and they do produce quite a decent amount of emissions, mainly through heating the building. I think for our diocese, it's about 80% of our emissions come from heat emissions. So that's from gas and oil boilers. And of course, with electricity as well, there's a degree of emissions just because, anything you plug in, you get electricity direct from the national grid. And whilst as a country, we're slowly getting towards net zero in terms of decarbonising the grid, we're not there yet. So all of our buildings, no matter how they're powered, whether it's heating, lighting, there's always emissions there. And I think it's also important to note, again, from a Church of England context and our target, the scoping, because people, and it starts getting technical, and that's where there's misunderstandings. You have scope 1, scope 2 and scope 3 emissions. So scope 1, I actually made a note of this because I thought this question might be coming.
I'm ready, prepared to be impressed. Go on, scope 1, give it to me.
So scope 1 covers direct emissions. So that's from like owned sources, so that's burning fuel in company cars or furnaces. As scope 2 covers indirect emissions from purchased energy, so that's your electricity, your gas, your oil. Scope 3 is, essentially everything else. And in terms of our target and 2030, we're just looking at scope 1 and scope 2. So whilst it is an ambitious target, It's not the most ambitious because we're not yet looking at scope 3, and that'll be somewhere in the future that we look at.
So could you
that.
give me an example of a scope 3
So
emission?
things like procurement, for example. So all of our buildings, I mean, especially our schools, we procure a lot of.
So if I buy a file of paper or something, it's the cost of delivering it to me. The net carbon
cost, exactly.
Okay.
So when you buy things like, I mean, people can. I think it's quite. It's become, I guess, a modern day behaviour. You want things really, really quickly. So, for example, if you bought something from Amazon, for example, because you know it's going to come really quickly, that might come, by plane or shipping in a really, let's say, unclean way, and that has emissions associated with it as well.
So, tell me how many churches are actively participating across our diocese?
Great question. And that's something that I get asked a lot, because obviously you're trying to convince people to go along with this and do this. And that is the main question that I get, is how many are involved. And the truth is, when I first joined, it was a really slow start, because there were some churches that had already made the jump, and they'd already gone ahead and installed some localised electric heating. A few churches had heat pumps and solar panels already, but they seemed to be really early adopters. And then as time went on and costs went up for things, people kind of got put off the idea. But in terms of the stats of where we're at right now, over the last year and a half, myself and our church buildings advisor, we visited over 100 churches. And on the most part, all of those churches are actively engaging in net zero. And that doesn't have to be massive capital projects, that can be smaller things as well. Things like LED upgrades and stuff like that. But I would say, in terms of a project pipeline, if you will, from the permissions process all the way through to that early development, as in scoping out projects, we've got millions and millions of pounds worth of projects in the pipeline for our churches. There's a significant amount of engagement amongst our parishes.
And could you say a bit about schools and clergy housing?
Of course. So schools is a really challenging area to work in, because in terms of statutory funding, what's actually out there to help do massive decarbonisation projects, there's not really anything out there anymore. There was the public sector decarbonisation scheme for a long time, and that was also, I mean, people will testify to this from across the country, is a really challenging, in terms of all the paperwork and all the different criteria. It's a really difficult scheme to be involved in. In terms of how our schools are actually participating in this, the main thing is they're looking at, I'd say, quite a holistic approach. So it's not just about the decarbonisation of a building, it's about their curriculum, it's about biodiversity, it's about climate justice. So lots of schools are developing their climate action plans, which was a statutory requirement to do. And we've actually partnered with an organisation called Let's Go Zero, who have helped thousands of schools put together climate action plans. And we've been working with Let's Go Zero and our schools to make that happen. And just to touch on the houses, we actually have a net zero house already in Nunney, and that was part of the National Church's demonstrator project. They kindly gave us some money to make one of our houses net zero. So that involved installing a heat pump and solar panels, and we were so efficient with the money that we're actually doing another one too. So I think with housing, watch that space, because obviously the DBF have to take on that financial burden to do that, and that's really difficult in the current situation. But we really are progressing really nicely with that too.
We're recording this podcast in the middle of April 2026.
Yes.
And that means that questions about energy resilience are greater than they have been for many a long year.
For sure.
How is that going to impact the work you're doing, and what should churches be thinking about as they reflect on the current international situation?
It's a really good question. I think it's a tough one, because I'm quite conflicted by it, because in one sense it's really positive, because as gas and oil prices go up, that it makes the financial trying to stack it up between an electric, arguably cleaner system versus a gas one, it makes those numbers better. If the price of gas and oil being so volatile, that might put churches off and schools off from from using that kind of fuel, which is a good thing, but at the same time, and you mentioned it there, that energy resilience, and it's really worrying to think that energy bills are going up so much. And it's already challenging enough for our schools and our churches, and they spend so much money on energy. I think last year our churches combined spent over £1 million on energy, and that's expected to rise this year, obviously because of the situation. So I think there's a real importance for, really getting a handle on what energy you're using and being more efficient. So whether you're using gas, oil, electricity, it's just being really sensible about how you're using energy. And, that's where lines such as heating the person rather than the space come in. Your LED lighting, solar panels, energy independence, and that becomes really important. We can't rely on other countries for our energy, we can produce it ourselves.
Moving to net carbon zero, as you say, it's a very ambitious target.
Yes.
And it can feel a bit like being asked to eat an elephant. And of course, the trick to eating an elephant is that you cannot do it all at once.
That's
you
true.
have to do it step by step. What are some of the most important things that you would encourage any place, be that a place of worship or a school or a vicarage? What are some of the first things that we need to do to move towards the carbon net zero goal?
Well, I think the key thing, and I mean, it's a really good opportunity. It's a very nice question because it's a really good opportunity to plug lots of different things that people could do. I think the first thing to consider is, is this something that you have to take on alone as a church? Because it really isn't. I hate using the word expert, and I'd never describe myself as an expert, but the diocese has employed several experts, if you will, people who have knowledge about this kind of thing. Whether we have our church buildings experts or our schools estates teams, myself and my colleague Sarah, people should be using those resources that are available. You don't have to undertake this by yourself. So the first thing I'd suggest is obviously getting in touch with, this is why we're here, this is what we're paid to do. We're support staff and we're there to support our parishes and our schools. I think the second thing, and it is like I said, a chance to plug, but the energy footprint tool, that simple carbon footprint calculator for our churches is probably the easiest thing a church can do to start its journey. And that's essentially just working out where you are, like what is your baseline carbon footprint and why is it like that? And more often than not, it's because you're using a bit more energy than you need to be, or you're powering your church through gas and oil. And by using your support staff, we can work out a way for you to change that.
So if a church wanted to get on board with using the energy footprint tool,
yes,
which we all heartily recommend, what do they need to do to get underway? Well, in very practical terms.
In very practical terms, all they need is, if they're completing it this year, for example, they just need all of their bills from 2025. So if they've, I'm assuming most churches are going to have used electricity, some gas and oil, just find your bills from January 25 to December 25 and add up how many kilowatt hours you've used or how many litres you've used and how much you've spent. And then you go straight over to the parish returns website where churches will complete their stats for mission and their finance returns. And it's right there, it's the third option on there. And you can just upload your information onto there.
So that's all you have to do. You don't have to measure the cubic meters of airspace in your church or anything complicated like that.
Nothing like that.
Just what your bill has been.
Exactly. It does it all for you.
Wow. So I'm taken surprised by quite how simple that was. So we've talked about accessing expertise. We've talked about using the energy footprint calculation tool.
Yes.
What would be the next things to think about after that?
I think then that's when you start getting practical, I think, because I think that's a really good time. Once you've done those basic things, you've taken on that advice, you've done that footprint tool, you need to be looking at, how can you reduce what you're using? As we said in the previous question about being more efficient, so using less. If you can get those bills down, it will give you that respite in the first place. I think, I was looking at the figures recently, I think half of our churches already have electric heating, and on the most part, that's like smaller churches, they're used once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks, and they've got localised electric heating, like infrared heating or under pew heating. And then the other half, they still have gas and oil systems. And what I would say for those churches, especially if they're infrequently used churches, you're probably overpaying for your energy bills. You're probably disproportionately overpaying compared to a church of similar usage context to you, but they have electric heating. And that can be really surprising to people because people think, well, electricity is more expensive than gas and oil. But how we actually use that energy, how we turn it into heat energy, whether we heat the people or heat the entire space, that's a big difference in energy usage.
So it's not just an issue of comfort. So, for example, I was in Spraxton Church just the other week and saw their amazing new Halo heaters.
Oh, yeah.
So not only are they considerably more comfortable to be in as a space, but less expensive as well.
Yes, so how they were heating, and I know that church well, and how they were heating it before, they were heating the entire volume of the building. And they'd have a huge warm-up time to be able to get it to, I wouldn't call it a comfortable temperature, having sat in the church, but they spent a lot of money and a lot of energy to actually bring the temperature up only a few degrees, and that never really translated to the surface temperatures. So whilst the air was a little bit warmer, the pews and all the stonework was freezing cold.
Yeah.
And now they've got infrared heating. It's a very different situation. It provides better comfort, cheaper, and at lower emissions.
Wow. Well, Dan, thank you so much for spending this time in conversation this afternoon. And as I've seen presentations you've given at Diocesan Synod and in other places, I'm just so impressed to see the way that the pace of our change in this area is increasing all the time. It's amazing to see how many churches now have projects in the pipeline and are pushing them forward to make churches more comfortable, to make worship more comfortable, to bring down bills and to enable us to achieve our goal of becoming carbon net zero by 2030. I hope this is something that we can all get behind together. Dan's been talking to us this afternoon about some of those first steps we can take, use the expertise we have, embrace the carbon footprint tool. And we're doing all of this so that we can make achievable gains and make a real difference in the world. I've got a lovely quote that you've given me here, Dan, which is that net zero isn't about perfection, it's about taking the next step. There's a lot of the Christian life in that. So, Dan, I want to thank you for the time we spent together today. I suspect we're going to keep on asking these questions over the years. I want to thank everybody who's been listening to Low Carbon, Higher Power and looking forward to you joining the podcast next time. But I think I'm going to give the last word to Dan. If there's anything that you would finally like to say as we are in conversation together this afternoon.
Well, I'd like to start by saying thank you, Bishop Michael. I know you're very busy, much busier than myself. So, getting time in your diary is very, very difficult. So thank you for taking the time. And I'd really like to reiterate what I said earlier about churches and schools as well, not being alone in this journey. Not only do you have the support services here, but across the diocese, there are so many people like you, and they've been in the exact same situation as you, and they've taken that leap of faith. And it's turned out very well for them in terms of their reducing of their footprint and reducing of their bills as well. And it can be really stressful doing big capital projects and changing heating systems, and we recognise that, but there is help on hand, and we have so many case studies to show the success stories. I guess my message there would be, just do it, just go for it.
Thank you. Thanks, Dan. Thank you so much.
Thank you.